Every now and then, it is important for us to think deeply about what the evangelical mission of the church looks and sounds like. It is probably an overused word these days, but there is no substitute for it. And I know it's a technical word, but it's still important. Contextualization. I'm not going to ask you to say it 5 times. How does the church reach out with the gospel to people in the unique contexts in which it is planted? How do we make connections between the gospel and real life circumstances? In many respects, the Christian faith is unique among the world religions in the way it gets planted and translated for many peoples and places. The Scripture is translated in many different places. Compare that to Islam, where you always use the original Arabic. No book in the Bible illustrates the contextualization of Christianity better than Acts. We've been reading different sections from the early church over the last several weeks. The gospel begins to be preached in Jerusalem, which would be called the navel of the earth, and it reaches the end of the earth as the people knew it at the time, which basically meant from one end of the Mediterranean basin to the other. The power of the gospel reaches rich and poor, Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female. In our first reading appointed for the day, the gospel reaches the sophisticated cultural and intellectual environment of a university town, Athens. Sort of like Princeton or University City in Philadelphia or Boston. The Apostle Paul comes to Athens, to the heart of pagan culture, to the town of Pericles and Plato. Now there's a lot to glean from Paul's experience in Athens, but I would like to focus on what we can learn from his missionary approach there. First, Paul meets the Athenians on their own turf. Paul stood in front of the Areopagus. In other words, Paul goes to the hot spot of conversation in Athens. He weighs in with the gospel in the place where the lively exchange of ideas normally occurs. We often use the term the Apostle Paul. An apostle means one who is sent out or sent away. Paul goes to where the people are. This is different than the keep the lights on mentality that seeps into our current Lutheran church experience. We are a bit stuck in this Christendom of yesteryear model, which thinks that the immigrant boats from Northern Europe will come in waves once again. And the fact is, life is pretty pleasant in those countries, and there's no reason to leave them. Larger families will just continue to stream in. And so we do things so well in ministry here that people will gravitate to the church building. Get what you need here, y'all come. When you think about it, this keep the lights on mentality is both passive and patronizing. Well, Paul shows up at the Areopagus at Mars Hill. He does significant ministry out there where people live, work, and converse instead of in here where we grow accustomed to being church. So where is our Areopagus in our neighborhoods? Where are the hot spots of human interaction and conversation about about the purposeful and weighty matters of our day. The township headquarters, the ball field, Starbucks right downtown here. Think about that question. Second, Paul takes the time and makes the effort to establish a friendly cultural connection where he goes. Paul, rather than standing back from pagan religiosity, pointing his fingers in righteous indignation, acknowledges the Athenians' hunger and thirst for meaning and purpose. Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. Paul puts his finger on the yearning for truth among the people. He indicates a deep connection with the culture by quoting prevalent poetry. Paul has friendly enough good sense to recognize that the people at least know that some kind of transcendence is needed to make sense out of life, to give coherence to the world. Brothers and sisters, do we take the time to establish that kind of friendly rapport with our neighbors? Or do we simply repeat the same old religious jargon and expect it to sink in? It takes work. I just got stuck with a job with my neighbors in my townhouse community of getting our privacy fences redone and painted. And so now I'm responsible for 3 of them and getting all the quotes. But in the process, I've gotten to know my neighbors a little bit better. Paul takes the risk here by joining the urgent conversation beside the people at the Areopagus. Paul goes to meet the people on their turf. Next, he voices a friendly appreciation for the people's religious yearning. And then he begins to move toward a more particular sharing about the nature of the one God of Holy Scripture. Surprisingly, in this context at Athens, Paul does not begin with Jesus Christ, the second person of the Apostles' Creed. Many times he had taken that approach, especially with Jewish audiences who already operated from a monotheistic understanding. But here, Paul wants to enter the conversation with the Athenians by gently correcting their affinity for multiple gods with a strong assertion of the reality of one Creator who makes all things cohere. The God who made the world and everything in it, He who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. Up until this point in time, many of the Athenians had latched onto a religious system that attached different gods to the many dimensions of life on earth, and many of us had to struggle through that in elementary school, learning all those Greek gods. Yet even with that, they had to have an etc. or catch-all God to make up for where all the others left off. So they fashioned in Athens an altar to an unknown God. Well, Paul focuses on that altar to an unknown God to the conversation in the direction of a respect for one Lord in whom we live and move and have our being, that brings everything together and makes all things connect and cohere. You may say, Pastor Dan, that's swell, but how does this turn in Paul's conversation move me? Well, we also operate under the assumption of multiple gods, things, ideas, and ideologies that drive our lives. If we separate separate out these different aspects and activities in our lives, we often turn them into ultimate commitments. And they all collide during the month of May. I often use the term May mode, because every organization in American society seems to need to have an event during the month of May. Sports, concerts, recitals, work deadlines, graduations, family celebrations, political primaries, and business activity and goals. All good things as long as they remain penultimate. But what Paul says to the Athenians, he also says to us. What if these are not multiple gods, but aspects of our lives that take on truer meaning and purpose when they are understood underneath the one Lord who lives and moves and grounds our life in the midst of all of this stuff? This one God provides the integrating framework in which we can make sense out of our crazy lives. Now, there's a lot more to be said about Paul's mission in Athens, and I would be enthusiastic to have a one-on-one conversation with you about it. But there's enough for us to remember today in these three things about Paul's approach. First, he goes to where the people are and where the lively conversations occur. Second, he respects the local culture and religious yearnings of the people in a kind manner. And third, Paul eventually begins to establish a focal point of conversation that leads to a strong witness to the Lord whom he serves and shares, in whom he lives and moves and has his being. This Lord, this one Lord indeed, is not far from each of us. Thanks be to God.